27 листопада працює медіа-центр.
It's November 27th. Ukraine Media Center continues its operation, and now we will be talking about the map of the barrier-free space and the way that technologies help create safe spaces. Joining us in the studio are Nataliia Kozlovska, Deputy Minister for Development of Communities and Territories of Ukraine, Denysenko, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at Lund Real Estate Company, Svitlana, Hnatiuk, Accessibility Expert at the Barrier-Free NGO, and Polad, Khalilov, Project Manager at the Ukrzaliznytsia Barrier-Free Railway Program. So what is the program with barrier-free space in Ukraine, in Ukrainian cities? Because now we're facing this challenge. A lot of people with disabilities, those who become disabled due to the Russian strikes, Russian attacks, the veterans. Also, there are parents with children's cars who need to have access to different facilities like social infrastructure facilities, and this problem is going to only become more acute. What is the dynamic where we are for the time being? Thank you, Svitlana. As you know, before the full-scale invasion, the barrier-free space movement was initiated in Ukraine, and back then the task was to teach our city planners, municipal planners, to take a different perspective at the barrier-free concept and to create the services so that they are barrier-free and accessible for all of the citizens of Ukraine. And we were starting this huge move back in 2021, and we've realized that in 2022, after the full-scale invasion, the philosophy even of this area has changed critically. The number of people with disabilities has grown. We understand that these persons are supposed to be like a full-fledged citizens of the cities and towns they're living in, to be able to use all of the challenges. And you're absolutely right, the scale of the issue is only going to grow. So the barrier-free space movement that was initiated by the First Lady, it started playing in a different light, because we've all realized how quickly we should move in the context of changes, both of legislative changes and in practical implementation of the developments. Hence, there was a strategy of the barrier-free space developed that contained a number of measures to be taken, what every ministry should do, starting with Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Healthcare, Central Elections Committee, all of the subjects influencing the shaping of the policy. What should they change in their regulations on one hand, and on the other hand, it was necessary also to contemplate how the regulations that are already implemented, and they were implemented on a wide scale, how do they reflect how is it reflected in every single settlement? How did the legislation change, and what is the physical reflection of those things? Can all of the people, can all of the citizens, can all of the persons with disabilities use the services of the Centers for Administrative Services in full, rather than not being able to get to the window where they can get advice? So it's a complex issue, and we've realized that Soviet legacy that we got in our cities was not, so to say, aimed at thinking about the people who need, well, aimed at clear understanding of the barrier-free space, and the people who can use it, the people with disabilities, the persons with disabilities, didn't exist like in Soviet legislation, and we've realized that we have to change the practical application of all of the legislation on the ground, so to say, so that every subject, every decision-making authority could shape their resolutions in such a way that they can be used, those resolutions can be used by all of the citizens, those who reside in big cities and small towns. And in order to get the ball rolling, in the beginning of the last year, in coordination with our reliable partners, Lund company, we clearly realized that we need practical developments that already exist in the regions to have them mapped so that the people who need it can enter the map and to take a look what's nearby and what are the facilities that are barrier-free, how, for example, residing in one town, if they need to get to a hospital, how can they need it in the most convenient manner, what transfer to use, which facilities are nearby, and that hospital they need to get to, is it barrier-free or not. So this partnership between the ministry and Lund was aiming at implementing practically this so-called barrier-free map so that it can be useful for everybody, so that everyone who needs it or either gets to a town for the first time, or if they just have a necessity to check out the barrier-free spaces so that they can look at this map to see what's nearby, which services they can use, and which facility they can get to, and that coffee shop that is nearby, is it barrier-free or not, whether they can get there to have a cup of coffee just like everyone else and to enjoy the moment. But in order to do this, you need to get to that institution or establishment. And as we talk to our ambassadors who support the ministry project called Movement Without Barriers, we understand that this kind of map is useful, and they understand if they use it, they can plan their route from one place to another and to get to that location they need currently. Talking about what establishments end up on the map according to the resolution of the government formulated in 2021. There was a monitoring of barrier-free spaces established in the communities, and if we check the results of monitoring back in 2021, dating to 2021, we've conducted a preparation of all of 1,400 establishments in a number of communities to understand which facilities are barrier-free and which are not. Well, when we talk about pseudo barrier-free space, when an establishment is said to be barrier-free, but I apologize if you ask that official to get to that facility, there are problems, because the facilities may turn out to be not so barrier-free as they are supposed to be. This monitoring dating back to 2024 demonstrated that as of today, we may say that only 20% of the establishments of Ukraine are barrier-free, which means we have a lot of things to do, not only in terms of legislation, but also in practical terms, so that the local governments have financial resources to transform their cities into convenient cities that can be used by the citizens living there. Talking about the barrier-free movement, last year we've implemented this project, Space Without Barriers. It included 15 towns and cities, and we've included both big cities and small towns, like settlements with different number of population, to demonstrate that barrier-free space has nothing to do with the amount of population. We are saying that every citizen should be able to use the services, even notwithstanding the size of the settlement. I mean, I want to thank all of the participants of the project for their input, because the mayors of such settlements, they understand why is it necessary. But for us, we understand this project will require to be scaled up. We have requests from more than 700 settlements who are saying they're ready to get involved, because they clearly see the results, they see the effects, and they see how the ambassadors, the veterans who monitor the barrier-free movement, they mention how important it is, how necessary it is, and talking about the components that were put together to make this map in order to demonstrate the example how those establishments, those facilities can be useful for all of the citizens. Well, this map also included a number of establishments and facilities that are being currently transformed. Those that were already formed and which are not barrier-free, which means that there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, we're talking about physical transformation here, investments in capital construction, capital transformation. So we got the ball rolling. We understand that it's going to take some time, and at the regional level, at the level of the local governments, and at the level of ambassadors, specifically those for whom we do it, they are supposed to be monitoring this process to make sure that this movement that we've initiated can be practically implemented in some specific establishments. Talking about the map, in the settlements on the map, there are more than 70,000 different facilities and establishments are now mapped, and this is the momentum, which is the part of the analysis, what was already done, what still needs to be done, because we need to understand that probably not all of the facilities can be rendered barrier-free, because some of them were constructed in such a way that without some significant reconstruction they cannot be transformed. So talking about barrier-free space condition, we've analyzed more than 90,000 facilities in 2024, and only 20% of those are barrier-free, and we were exercising the monitoring on the platform of the Ministry of Healthcare Facilities, banks, and if we see that the healthcare facilities are only 43% of them are barrier-free, we understand that there's still a lot of work to be done. Talking about other facilities that should be transformed, so not only buildings, but also crossroads, municipal transport, all of those things should be interrelated, because even if you walk out of your building, of your home where you live, realizing that you cannot use a healthcare facility, whether it's a clinic or a hospital, still you need to get to that facility, and in order to get there you may need to use other public transport or use sidewalks or other city spaces, but they should be fit for use. Recently we were visiting Poltava, and Poltava is in the middle of transforming certain territory near the military hospital, and we understand why in this format specifically, why is it this way is chosen by Poltava. We understand that they implement this barrier-free concept, and even if we make the facilities accessible, still using the city space such as sidewalks or crossroads or underground passageways would be impossible if we don't add this barrier-free component, because the tile that was laid back in the Soviet times is in such terrible condition that a person using a wheelchair cannot use that road paved by the tile. And those ambassadors who help in implementation of this project, mostly they are the military using their prosthetics. They understand that using such sidewalks may be impossible rather than just difficult. So this project is aimed at rendering our cities useful and such that can be fit for use. What are we planning to do next? We continue our monitoring. Last year we come up with an analysis, and this year we are going to do the same. There are more people involved in this process. We understand that monitoring is taking place based on certain checklists that are supposed to provide a clear answer to the question, what exactly, in which way a facility can be rendered barrier-free to improve the situation with the checklist, because for the time being, different facilities, there are 30 to 40 questions they need to answer, and we understand they need to keep moving in this direction, and we want to thank the communities which get actively involved in this project, in this process, and reformed their cities so they are useful, and because we understand without local authorities, who are the key stakeholders, the parties interested in this transformation. So I want to thank them for understanding how important it is for how promptly they get immersed in these projects and realize that veterans, elderly people, other categories of population with lower mobility, all those categories are supposed to be socially active and economically active citizens taking part in the life of their citizen towns. When it comes to legislation, you know that recently we have adopted amendments to the construction standards that were developed in coordination with the civil society organizations, in order to make this situation better, even with the account of practical implementation of barrier-free space movement. Recently, there was a standard developed upon the initiative of our ministry that implements the principles of European Union when it comes to barrier-free space, in order to have, in order to stay in the same page when it comes to legislation of European Union and Ukraine. But we understand that we have to continue. It's no time to stop, because the practical implementation of certain projects and raising awareness of the citizens about the practical results, specifically in the areas there it's related to, for example, this loan project who enjoys crazy demand. For us, it's a complex solution of what we do in the context of barrier-free space and what we are about to do. Thank you, Ms. Nataliia, Ms. Anna. There were multiple mentions of barrier-free space map, which is a joint project of the Ministry and Lund. Can you please tell us more about this map? What is its functionality? What are the opportunities it's provided? And whom it can be useful for? Well, let me focus on functionality, innovative nature, and the maps themselves. The map can be accessible from notebooks, tablets, mobile phones, any device of your convenience. What are the advantages of digital monitoring of barrier-free space? It's all happening in real time. How do the establishments and facilities end up on the map? The owners of the installations just add the data, they click send, and they end up on the map. That's a very quick process. You don't have to send any letters, either electronic or paper ones. Everything is automated. Second is that the digital monitoring allows us to analyze data. So in the process of the data processing, both us and the ministry can see what is the pace of data provision. We can check which communities provide the data more intensely, which are slower, which sectors get more actively involved in monitoring. So the better understanding of situation on the go. So to say, another advantage of the digital monitoring is the public control. The map is an open public property. Every citizen of Ukraine can check the map, can check what is the information added to any installation on the map. It cannot be so that someone provides some unrealistic data and it remains unnoticed. No, everything is clear, everything is visible. It's more difficult to provide irrelevant data. And if a person sees that some data for some location is not like actual, they may report and the relevant amendments would be made. And another advantage is that digital monitoring at the map allow us for quick update of the data. For example, some educational institution had a non-standard ramp, and then after the repairs it became standard, that ramp. So those upgrades can be reflected on the map as well. What is the functionality of the map? You can see 70,000 dots. Every dot is a facility or installation or an institution, like educational institution, for example. So you can click on that dot and a card of the installation is being opened with a detailed description. And the first thing we see is the color. If the color is closer to the green, it means that the location is more accessible. If the color is more reddish, it means it's less accessible. Also, there is a text and digital index of barrier-free space, which allows us to orient whether it's a barrier-free facility or not. If it says that the facility is barrier-free, we understand that if we come there, it's supposed to be very convenient. Then there is a list of necessary attributes of barrier-free space. If there are some attributes at the location, for example, elevator or parking for the persons with disabilities, then this element will be marked with a tick. If not, then it will be marked with a cross. Also, there are pictures on the map so that everyone can see with their own eyes and to assess whether this or that installation is barrier-free. Also, there are filters. For example, if you want to visit a cafeteria with your friend or a family member using a wheelchair, so you can pick only the cafeterias to see the cafeterias around you and to pick the one mostly corresponding your barrier-free needs. Also, the map contains lists which are useful for the people who use screen readers, those with sight impairment, because the screen reader reads information in text format and a person can easily orient which data is available on the map. Also, there is such a functionality as to sort by distance, and it will show you the installations closer to you. Also, you can search by location. If you want to find some specific facility, you just add the name in the search line and it shows you where it is on the map. Also, I said that there is an option to report the discrepancies. How to do it? You scroll down the installation card and there is a button, report discrepancy. We hand over the data to the public officials in charge and the changes are being made. If some community sees that some of their facilities, some of their installations is not present on the map, they can press on the map and provide the data according to the checklist. So, what are the benefits that this barrier-free map is yielding? By the end of this year, the data from 70,000 locations will be added to the open data portal apart from the critical infrastructure facilities or military installations or other facilities close to the front line. All those installations that can be reflected publicly, they will be also reflected in the open data portal. And it's important because so they can be analyzed, they can be used, and both the researchers and donors and civil organizations can join in. So open data is the future. Also, you can quickly actualize and update the data. For example, during the next stage of monitoring in 2026, the parties in charge will not have to fill the cards once again. They will be able to open the card that was filled before and just put the ticks where it's necessary. It's going to save time and resources, and we all know that now time is such that every minute is precious and everyone is busy. And also there's another advantage, that such as the changes can be monitored. So the data on the map, it's like a chart, and we can take the data as of the year 25 and 26, and to see what has changed, it will be easy and useful. And also the map has at least 3 goals. First one is to provide the data for the development of municipalities. It's important that the data and the decisions about the changes in the municipalities are based on this data. It's quite a progressive and modern approach. Another thing is what Ms. Nataliia has mentioned, to show comfortable locations. For example, if you are a family with a small child, you can check the map and to see where's the closest park where there is a, say, bathroom with a room where you can change diapers for your kid. Or if you're a person using a wheelchair and you're looking for a cafeteria, you can check it and find it on the map. Also, we need to emphasize that barrier-free is about everybody. It's important because the changes in the cities are only possible if everyone gets involved, everyone does what they can. And in reality, every single one of us can do something useful, so our cities are barrier-free. Thank you, and here I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Svitlana. Thank you. Just like, well, we've heard examples about how people can use this map to find barrier-free spaces for themselves. But talking about public organizations, about businesses, how it can be useful for them. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to say that it's difficult to overestimate the importance of digital transformations. The first steps were made back in the day when the organization that I represent got involved in the Loon initiative. They've developed those questionnaires that allowed everyone who wants to do so, all of the parties involved, to exercise their monitoring of accessibility of their favorite spaces. And that was the first attempt to gather and to digitalize data about barrier-free spaces. And I rejoice about the fact that in 2025 we're not talking about some separate initiatives, but about the fact that the monitoring was done with the participation of the Ministry of Communities and Territories Development, and that the data is available for everyone. First time in the history of Ukraine, we got non-aggregated generalized data, but spatially arranged detailed information about every facility that was studied, and transferring this data to the map of barrier-free space is something that was missing before. Now we can not only say in a generalized way that barrier-free space is developing in this or that community, but we can clearly identify where are the barriers, what is their type, and based on that to make decisions. Also, this monitoring highlighted a number of issues in the barrier-free concept. Let me cover 3 key ones. First is the fragmented nature of the resolutions, because even in the communities that claim the barrier-free development, there are still islands of inaccessibility. Well, also, we've seen some inconsistency between the existing situation and what was declared before. That's what Ms. Nataliia and Ms. Anna have mentioned. Monitoring highlighted those facilities that were previously identified as barrier-free, but had some violations before. Now we can document those violations and report them to the community. Also, there are blind zones that were highlighted in the business space because many businesses got their, so to say, entry point, and some of businesses are already planning transformation for the next year. Some are trying to train their personnel, but this monitoring exercise is quite an important function when the data can be comparable. The changes move faster. The communities don't want to remain those red dots on the map. The businesses want to look more responsible, and the civil organizations and expert communities got an opportunity to advocate their decisions based on which they can pitch new solutions. And it's important for different stakeholders, specifically for the communities, because for communities it is the tool of planning. When we've identified and visualized all of the barriers, it allows to, so to say, integrate those plans into the budget programs, and the map becomes a tool of transparent communication because it allows us to document the state of affairs for the time being, and as the monitoring is taking place on annual basis, it allows us to keep track of the progress. For businesses, it's a competitive advantage because everybody knows that the accessible facilities enjoy better popularity, and it stimulates business to invest in the comfort of their employees and visitors and their clients. Also, it can be not so clear as an advantage, but the businesses can pick their locations, those that enjoy the most popularity, and it's a whole new level of advocacy for civil organizations. Every initiative may appeal to specific facilities, to specific addresses, to specific solutions that are necessary here and now, because as Ms. Nataliia has mentioned, every facility is unique and not always universal advice works. For expert community, it's the ability not to repeat the process because we have the results of the survey ready, and we can provide our recommendations on improvement of accessibility, which may save time and resources. Well, it's important for all of us, the results of this monitoring, because the first time in the Ukrainian history we got this public, specially arranged map of barrier-free spaces, and just like any other tool, it requires some additional improvement probably, but even now we can state that thanks to it, the data about the barrier-free space becomes open, and it improves access to accessibility, which allows for more manageable process and to manage or to coordinate different stakeholders at a time. We were mostly talking about the real estate facilities and the way the barrier-free spaces are being implemented there, but let's talk about transport. What are the positive movements in Ukrzaliznytsia? What was already done? What is being done for the time being? And what are still the existing gaps? Mr. Polad? Well, thank you, dear colleagues. Let me talk in practical terms. You know that every year we hold this monitoring. Back in our day, we were facing the issue where the checklist that was suggested by this monitoring was not quite covering all of the issues and nuances when it comes to movement through railway stations, which are different architecturally. The structure may be different. It may be a railway station, a big one or a small one. It may be a platform in the field. And what exact requirements should we set for it? What was a big question. Well, there was an attempt to approach it in this way. If the transportation service is available, then it means that the railway station is accessible. But we jettisoned this idea because we realized that railway station is a space for provision other services on top of the transportation service, and that the destiny brought us together with Loon civil organization, and on our end we've developed a relevant checklist that was then improved by this civil organization. It's more detailed, it takes into account more nuances, and it was provided in the regions. The monitoring was agreed by our employees in the regions, and there is a double benefit in it, that data had to be processed, because we understand that competency of those people doesn't always correspond with the expert requirements for the specialists, but at the same time we were in the process of training of those employees. First of all, we were teaching them barrier-free space literacy and understanding of what barrier-free space is, what barrier-free concept is. And we've realized that we have to transform the thinking of the people, first of all. And thus we were able to cover some gaps in the data that we have, that we keep processing, and we are really happy that we have this opportunity of feedback from the community. And for us, this tool of interaction with the community is incredibly important, because it really highlights the actual problems, the actual very technical, detailed things that the visitors or the passengers come across, and we understand what we have to work on, what to pay more attention to, and on top of that, it allows us prioritizing the installations for the next year, because every day we put together a plan for creation of barrier-free space in the railway stations, and this specific information is laid as the foundation of those plans. Because I have to say something else. It was already partially mentioned. For us, this map, on top of being an opportunity to collect the data and to submit the data, to provide this information for our clients and users, like we understand that information about the absence or the presence of the barrier is just equally important as the information about the absence of the barriers. And it was important for us to inform the people not only about the availability of a ramp, for example, but whether that ramp is compliant with the standards, not only our standards. Well, we really refer to the standards of international experience, ISO, different standards that were recently implemented, that came into effect, and State Construction Standard 240. The third revision will be approved shortly, and many nuances were taken into account when it comes to railway stations infrastructure. Back in the day, it was an honor to get involved with the working groups. So again, all that information that we're getting, in a way that we get it, we submit it to the map, and we focus on whether those solutions, like a ramp or sanitary installation, is it compliant with the standards. There was a lot of work done 5 years ago, for example, when the state standards were only developed, and unfortunately the competency of some architects back then left much to be desired. But again, 90% of our facilities, for the time being, they are partially barrier-free. Well, but you know, it's a manipulative wording. We communicate this information, we provide this information. On top of that, it's cool that we can submit pictures. We get a lot of feedback from the public when they ask us to demonstrate the pictures, specifically the pictures of the place they're supposed to arrive at, if it's a children's room or a platform or just a territory. And again, it's worth mentioning here that in course of such monitorings, we pay attention to the adjacent territory, which frequently helps us to highlight the existing problems, so that in coordination with the local governments we could hold some activities to remove barriers in that territory. Well, that's probably it. If there are no questions, well, thank you, Mr. Polad. Well, Ms. Nataliia, I would like to get back to that figure that you mentioned in the beginning, that only 20% of the installations in Ukraine are barrier-free, and I suspect that if we also remove those projects which are, if we deduct those installations that are pseudo-barrier-free, as you've mentioned, so the number is even smaller. So what is planned to be done, or what is being done to make sure that Ukraine is barrier-free? Because 20% is not something that we can afford, specifically now that we're waging a war or after its end. Thank you, Svitlana, talking about our plans as a ministry and talking about physical barrier-free space, and we're talking specifically about that now. And we clearly realize that to this flagship project that we have now, the 15 cities that are transforming their public spaces with a total length of transport routes more than 100 kilometers to render all of the facilities in that route barrier-free, to demonstrate which principles of barrier-free concept we are ready to implement, what is barrier-free space, and how come the ramp is existing but it doesn't make any sense. So this movement is already underway now, and this move is aimed at making sure we can demonstrate what the cities look like. And we have to emphasize that the cities that have sufficient resources and have a desire to get involved, so that they could get involved and have a desire and financial support to bring changes to their cities. So without this union, without this unity of vision of the local government that the changes are necessary, we won't be able to achieve results. So in this case, we're saying that we need to scale up. This year we've demonstrated how this scale up may look like, what barrier-free space we're talking about, and how they need to shape this logic. What is it about? What project solutions are better to be applied, and which visualization we can discuss. So this movement is already underway, and as our ambassadors are saying, that's the right movement, it's necessary. We want to move faster, but we all understand that we're talking resources here, and we understand that the majority of government resources are of restricted nature, but all of the budgets should be aiming at making sure that the cities, the municipalities are convenient for use by the citizens who reside there. So this is the movement that we plan. We have certain ambitions regarding the figure, the way we want it to look next year, in the year 2030. We understand that Ukraine is only just starting this movement. Unfortunately, we have this Soviet legacy. It should all be reviewed in order to make sure it's fit for use. So it's an important and ambitious area. We keep moving, and I urge all of the local authorities to get involved in this collaboration together with us to make sure your cities and municipalities are convenient. Thank you, dear colleagues. Do you have any questions on the floor? If so, please raise your hands. Good afternoon. My name is Yevhen Komarov. I'm deputy head of the Institute of Veterans. Every morning I read lectures about inclusiveness for the small cities of Ukraine, about adaptiveness, and hence I have the question, how do you plan, I understand it's about decentralization, but how do you plan to raise awareness of the territorial communities about this map and its capabilities? And another question, will everyone be able to make changes, or do you have to be expert, somehow accredited? And another question, a third one, if there are spaces with barriers. Can we influence communities in some way to stimulate them to bring changes, to change those spaces with barriers into barrier-free or partially barrier-free? Thank you. So awareness, raising awareness about the barrier-free spaces map. So let's start first of all with the way that we communicate with the communities. How do we see that their municipal spaces should be different? As of now, active communication with those 15 municipalities that have implemented barrier-free space movement is ongoing. It's not like everyday communication, it's continuous communication about what it is. Also, we communicate with other communities and demonstrate an example of how it's happening in a different way. For example, what Lviv does to make sure that its spaces, those territories that are being actively used by the persons with low mobility so that they can be useful. And now this integration of principles application, the effect of what can be better, and you have to think about your cities in a different manner. We also use it to make sure that the local authorities take a look and check how can they render their municipalities more barrier-free. When it comes to the state ownership, we can provide recommendations to the local governments so that they pay attention to those matters. We can add funding from the state budget, talking about the communal facilities such as centers for provision of administrative services. We need to discuss with the local governments what to do to make sure that those facilities preserve their purpose and what barrier-free space concepts can be implemented there. So it's a joint vision of how we should do things to demonstrate an example, the way it can look. It's an administrative regulation with regard to those installations we can influence and respective recommendations regarding what can be done with other facilities that are located in other settlements. My colleagues were mentioning also businesses here because we position this situation in relation to the businesses as convenience of use of their services. Like, let's not forget now about the services. If it's a banking institution so that people could use the services of the bank, we're talking about the workplaces for persons with disabilities, and business should be mentioning that those citizens who work at certain organizations, institutions have an opportunity to use that workspace and how it should be shaped to make sure that those people can be economically active on one hand, and so that those facilities can be used to. And now let me pass the mic to Anna. So talking about about awareness raising and should you be accredited to make changes. Well, the persons in charge, they add data. Who is a person in charge is being solved at the level of municipality or regional administration. So it's more of a question to the ministries rather than ours. So, for example, if a civil organization, representatives of the public want to get involved in this process, they have to address their communities, the community councils, to submit a request to become a person in charge. But one way or another, every citizen, every denizen of every settlement can come and leave their feedback about the information provided earlier, and it's even more important than to conduct the preliminary monitoring, because this public control is important. It gives you understanding that the data is visible, that the society controls it, and it raises their responsibility level, talking about awareness raising, the Ministry of Communities and Territories Development does a lot in this area. Also, we get actively involved in this process. Barrier-free space NGO, Ukrzaliznytsia, everybody who provides data, they communicate it through their media, through their communication channels. And again, I'd like to receive that every single one of us can make their own contribution to tell that there is such a tool, how to use it, to share your experience, and I will be happy to hear not only negative but also or not only positive but also negative feedback, because digitalization allows us creating digital tools that can be updated, that can be improved, and this feedback is incredibly important. Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any more questions? Yes, please, if I may continue. There are implemented barrier-free space maps implemented in Ternopil, and there are attempts to create a barrier-free space map for Kiev. Do you get synchronized with those initiatives, and probably you can overlap them, hand over the data that was already implemented? Talking about whether we as a ministry understand how the local governments paved this barrier-free way, we understand the logic when they were formulating this route. We understand what was it related to, why is it happening this way in Ternopil or the other way in Lviv. We understand their logic, and we were trying to do things in such a way that those routes are different, so that the experience that we currently demonstrate to other cities in the future planning of the movement, so we can demonstrate different principles of application of different solutions in different installations using different approaches. That was the logic that we were pursuing as we were shaping the barrier-free space group and talking about whether the installations on the barrier-free routes are reflected on the barrier-free space map. Yes, they are, and not only those that are being reformatted, but also others that are on those routes, and even those that were barrier-free back in the day when we started, and there are some facilities that we plan to add next year, not this year, and we're saying there are barriers, and we try to be as honest as possible, what we can use, what we can, what we cannot, what do we transform, and what we intend to transform in the future. You have more questions? All right. I'm in touch with the communities, and there is an issue with inclusive transport. For example, persons with disabilities, representatives of any low mobility groups, it's not convenient for them to walk out of their building and to get to, say, Center for Administrative Services or get other social services of any kind. So in this map of yours, can we build a route so that we understand that more transport should be added? Well, on top of Ukrzaliznytsia, I understand you work on a global level, but talking about local level. Well, talking about the routes, it's an important request. We keep getting it. It's our task for the future, because in order to build roads for the walking movement and movement of transport, we need more detailed information, more data. So that's a task not for this year, but yes, that's one of our plans, and we're looking for opportunities to implement it. And on our end, if I may continue, Svitlana, in some settlements that are part of this project, when we talk about reformatting of the road network, we're saying that it may be not only about a bus stop, but also in a way that the municipal transport should be accessible in those routes and so on. And there are examples in big cities and smaller municipalities, and we understand we have to continue developing so that the planning that you discuss doesn't only involve looking at the installation, but also to build the routes so that people can get from one point to another. Because one thing is when you reside in a settlement and you know the way it looks like and it's convenient for you, you already have skills of movement around it, and it's a whole different thing when a veteran being rehabilitated ends up in Lviv and you don't understand how the city space is built and how can you build your road to get from the hospital where you're being rehabilitated to, say, prosthetics center, and what the route looks like and what's necessary to be done. We understand that problem, and hopefully there's going to be another stage of development of this barrier-free space project, so we can all get an opportunity to move across such settlements. Also, I would like to add that we as a civil organization, Barrier-Free Space, we communicate some important statement to the communities that now we cannot fund something that is not barrier-free. We cannot invest in non-barrier-free premises or road network or transport. And for example, in Bila Tserkva, a small town in Kiev region, they are at the level of the community. They've approved a rule. They don't admit transportation businesses that don't have inclusive buses, at least one per route. So the communities can advocate it on their end and set the rules in such a way that they don't fund the non-barrier-free solutions. Just one short question. So informational barrier-free space and the way that training is going on in the communities, how to communicate properly, how to support the people with disabilities, how to accompany the people with disabilities, and is it implemented in the map? Let me answer talking about the way the information space is being built around barrier-free space in every single field, because we're not only talking about the smart communication, so to say. It's not only about the support, it's about all of the components that are being part of the barrier-free concept, and they include a lot of elements of what communication should look like about in barrier-free context. Because if we talk about Ministry of Interior and driving school, that's one thing. And if we consider Ministry of Healthcare, there's a whole broad range over there, and it starts with formulation of protocols of certain rehabilitation component, and they're completely different when it comes to the people who lost sight. That's one thing. And people who use wheelchairs, that's a whole different situation. So talking about those who shape this communication framework in the government, let me remind you that as of now, we have certain communication plan that is being coordinated by our partners from the Ministry of Culture, which implements this communication framework in relation to all of the components related to barrier-free space, starting with the workplace and shaping of the workplace and cooperation with the businesses regarding how they should work in this area, and ending with another component in other areas, whether it's a Ministry of Healthcare or Ministry of Education or other ministries shaping policies in this area. I'm not even talking about the Ministry of Social Policy, in case of which there's a lot of plans and tasks related to barrier-free space, everything related to barrier-free space. So yes, we understand this is very important, and this area is way more expensive than it may seem, and our colleagues presented the plan of communication in this area and certain results of this work. So thank you for your question. This is incredibly important, and it's way more important than it may seem. Thank you. Thank you very much for your involvement. I want to thank all of the guests. Thank you for the great job that you're doing. Let me remind you, we were talking about the map of barrier-free spaces in Ukraine, and the team of Ukraine Media Center works on putting together the schedule of further events. Thank you for staying tuned.